think when I was a child, I was always obsessed with stories and storytelling. And, like every child, I think the kind of nursery rhyme thing. And I remember writing long stories. I remember being in my class when I must have been about 8, and I was allowed to carry on writing my story because I was just so caught up in the moment that everybody else had moved on and was doing something else, and I was sat on my own writing a story.
I think it's who took me to poetry? My brother, who was a few years older, and in my young teens, he would arrive seriously saying, "Read this," and it would be the Faber Book of Modern Verse and a poem called "Warning to Children."
Well, I was brought up as a Baptist, which meant that every Sunday I went to chapel and recited in the morning service, in afternoon Sunday school, but not in the evening. So I kind of heard hymns and religious poetry a lot when I was small in Welsh and English.
I love it because it distills emotion, experience.
There's always a poem that can help you with whatever's happening in your life. And that seems to make sense of it when nothing else is making sense.
Because it's portable and accessible, I love it.
I think my favourite poet is Sylvia Plath. She's stayed with me right from my teenage years up to present day. And I can always open her collected poems and find a poem that speaks to me on any day.
My granny, who was something of a character, called Nell Pegg, she knew Dylan Thomas and used to go drinking with him. And we lived pretty close to Larne, so he was a customer of hers. She was a seller of second-hand goods, now called vintage. Well, I'm so influenced by Dylan Thomas that it's really difficult to shake him off.
Seamus Heaney has, I think, stayed with me over the longest time, because of his wonderful way of making things gleam.
I think there can be something in every day that can be of interest. And that's another thing that makes me love the work of Sylvia Plath. She was described as being a kind of artisan, taking something from every day. And when she couldn't create a life-changing poem from it, it was kind of described as making a chair or a table or a piece of furniture. She'd take what she had and make a poem out of it.
My son Tom gives me inspiration. He died 13 years ago, just as I was partway through an open university writing course, and I put down my pen then. 5 years later, a psychotherapist worked with me with poetry, introduced me to some very strong poets, R.S. Thomas, Ruth Stone, and the Eastern Central European poets called the Poets of Survival. And they wrote about the most difficult situations and subjects, but it was transformative, and they were able to write so that we could actually read it. And
What gives me well, people give me inspiration. I'm a psychologist, and I love looking at ordinary interactions between people. So I love poems that focus on people and their reactions to each other and their behaviour. A bit like, being a kind of wildlife expert or something like that, but, scrutinising apes. I like scrutinising people like that, and I like poetry that does that.
that's quite hard, isn't it? I think I'm a bit precious about haiku. I love really good, whatever good is, translations of Japanese haiku. And I feel that sometimes they're just churned out. We've got 17 syllables, great. So I kind of am a little bit precious, you could say, because there shouldn't really be any no-nos.
Well, poetry I can't understand, but that's quite a lot, actually. So, I don't feel that I'm steeped in kind of strong literary knowledge. So that's some poetry excludes me, but that's through my ignorance rather than any deficit in the poet.